to another video. So, in my attempts to try and locate the source of a knocking sound in the front right of my Altezza, I found the front lower control arm bushings were completely stuffed. So I bought a set of TRD bushings, and in this video we're going to replace them. So follow me through the process.
Alright, so the first step in removing the old bushing is to try and get rid of the centre. I have seen guys use blow torches and use a flame to burn the rubber out, but instead I opted for the drill and a drill bit. As you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. Just use that drill bit to try and rip and tear the rubber until the centre becomes free. It gave me a little bit of trouble throughout, and you can see why, because I was putting quite a bit of stress on the drill bit. But in the end, it seemed to work pretty well.
One. So what I'm left with now is obviously the remaining rubber and the steel collar, which is the outer band of the bushing. So I'm going to attempt to cut a slot in that steel band and then try and pry that steel band out of the lower control arm.
I was pretty confident going into this step that cutting a slot into that outer steel band was going to create enough of a gap that I could pry the rest of it out. I just had to be careful that I didn't cut too far and cut into the arm itself. Using a screwdriver, a hammer and a few calibrated taps, I managed to get the screwdriver underneath the steel band and release it from the arm. It actually worked better than I expected, so I'll definitely be using this technique next time I need to replace bushings like this in the future.
Easy as. So now the old bushings have been removed, the new TRD bushings are set up ready to go. You can see on this right hand arm here, set it up. This is roughly how it'll sit in the car, with the two main portions of rubber fore and aft and the right hand wheel sitting out here. This should ensure that any wheel movement up and down and any braking fore and aft will be nicely absorbed by that rubber. Anyone interested, that's the part number of the bushing, so you order 2 of those, and that's referred to as the number 2 arm. And my plan to push these in is to actually use one of the old collars and then fit a steel plate on top and use a hydraulic press to push those down. We'll see how we go. I'm anticipating that this collar is going to move and flex a wee bit. I may have to change the plan, but we'll tackle it as it comes.
Alright, so here was a little bit of fun. Moment of truth, trying to push the new bushing in with the outer band of the old bushing. and exactly what I thought was going to happen happened, and it ended up splaying out. I ended up squaring it all up and setting it up again for another go, and I was actually making decent progress, as you can see, but unfortunately ended up chickening out and opting for a different technique. Although it looks like quite an oddball setup, this actually worked really well. Everything was nice and solid, and I had a good firm surface to use to press down on and press that bushing in. One thing that actually surprised me through this process was that it needed a hell of a lot more force than I was expecting to push that bushing in. So if you are doing this yourself, make sure you've got a good solid setup, and don't be afraid to put a little bit extra force in to get that bushing to move.
So now the new TRD bushings are fitted, we're going to swap these arms out with the ones that are currently fitted to the car. The car's up on axle stand, so it's nice and safe. So we'll get the front wheels off, we'll get started. So here we've got the two front bolts for the arm. That comes back to one main bolt through the bushing. To get that arm out, you've also got to take this brace off, which is held in by two bolts that go through these holes, and then two more go through the front cross member, and then another two on the other side. Normally you'd have to take this plastic guard off, but I'm going to leave it in place and pull that arm out by just gently pulling the brace down out of the way.
By this point, I've replaced the arm on the right hand side of the car, and I've moved on to the left. I've removed all of the brace bolts bar one, and I'm just removing the last two forward arm bolts. Once that last brace bolt comes out, the brace is free, and I'm able to pull that lower control arm away from the car. Because the bushing aligns on a spigot, we've got to pull that rear end of the arm down off the spigot in order to remove the whole arm from the car. The old arm comes out, and the new arm, fitted with the TRD bush, is ready to go in. I made this process a little bit easier for myself by applying a bit of multi-purpose grease to the centre shaft of the bushing in order for it to slip onto the spigot on the underside of the car a little bit easier. a bit of a wiggle, and a few calibrated taps, and the new arm is home. I applied some medium strength thread locker to the threads of the bolts and then fitted them up. I found those front bolts a little bit hard to fit because of the twist created by the bushing, but I just took my time and made sure the threads were engaged before I seated them with the impact wrench. I loosely fitted all the brace bolts on both sides of the car and on the front cross member prior to seating them with the impact wrench. The main bolts were also given a final tighten with the breaker bar. So after the two arms had been replaced, all that was left to do was to refit the front wheels and drop the car off the axle stands.
So there it is, both bushings replaced with TRD items and then fitted to the car. It's an easy enough job to do if you've got the time and the tools, just make sure to be safe while you're doing it. So if the video's been helpful to you, give it a thumbs up and hit me with any questions you might have in the comments. And until next time, see you later. Cheers.